There is a story carved into the bones of the world that the children of the new earth were not meant to remember. A story that began long before the rain. A story that ended in water and silence and the slow forgetting that comes when a generation chooses to look the other way. The man who saw it survived because he was told to build. The man who saw it survived because he was told to enter. The man who saw it survived because, for 40 days and 40 nights, the door of the great vessel stayed shut, sealed by a hand that was not his own. And in those 40 days, through the cracks between the planks, through the tar-darkened pitch that bound the cedar beams, through the small windows set high beneath the roof, Noah saw what the world had become. And he saw what it took to wash it away. It is told that the rain did not begin the way rain begins. It is told that on the first morning, the sky did not darken in the manner of storms. The animals were already inside. The door was already shut. The old man stood in the half-light of the upper deck and listened, and at first there was nothing. No wind, no thunder, only the breathing of the creatures below and the slow creak of the timbers as they settled. And then, far above, something cracked. Not a cloud. Something deeper. Something that the people of that world had built their entire understanding upon. And from that crack, the first water fell. Not in drops, in sheets, in columns, in a sound that those inside would later describe as the sky tearing itself open like a curtain pulled by hands that did not belong to any creature of the earth. The fountains of the deep broke first beneath the cities. That is what the witness remembered. Not the rain, but the trembling. The ground beneath the ark groaned for an hour before the first drop fell, and the old man pressed his palm against the wooden floor and felt it shudder the way a beast shudders before it strikes. Outside the vessel, the springs of the lowlands burst upward. Wells that had given water to villages for 10 generations now spat black mud and hot vapor and the bones of things that had been buried beneath them. The ground gave up its secrets. The earth opened its mouth. And the people who lived above those mouths ran toward what they thought was higher ground, and the higher ground betrayed them. For there were giants in those days. The witness inside the ark would have known this without needing to look. He had walked among them. He had seen their footprints sunk 3 hands deep into the riverbanks. He had heard their voices from the hills at night, voices that were not the voices of men but lower, longer, carrying across distances no human throat should have been able to reach. They were called the Nephilim, the fallen ones, and the world before the rain had been built in their image. Their cities had walls that no mortal architect could have raised. Their temples had altars stained with the marks of things no human heart should have known. Their blood was not the blood of Adam. It was a corrupted line, a stitched and grafted thing, born of a union that the heavens had forbidden and that the earth had been forced to carry for centuries. When the rain came, the giants did not fall first. The witness, looking through the high window beneath the roof of the ark, would have seen them last. Because they climbed. They climbed the towers they had built. They climbed the mountains they had named after themselves. They climbed onto the backs of the creatures they had bred for war and for sport, the great beasts whose bones the new earth would later mistake for dragons and dinosaurs and demons. And when the water reached the towers fell. And when the water reached the mountains were not enough. And when the beasts went under, the giants stood upon their drowned shoulders and screamed, and the screams were heard inside the ark, and the old man covered his ears, and his sons covered their ears, and the women wept into the dry grain that was meant to feed them for a year. But the screaming did not last. Water has a mercy that the witness would not have called mercy. The giants who were tall enough to remain above the surface for a day were swallowed by the second day. The giants who could swim, and there were some who could, were drowned by exhaustion and by the things that rose from the deep to meet them. For the deep is where the truly old things lived. The Nephilim were tall, but the Nephilim were young. There were creatures in the abyss whose names had not been spoken since before the garden was planted, and when the fountains of the deep burst, those creatures rose. They rose hungry. They rose patient. And they fed on what the rain had washed down from the high places. And the witness inside the ark heard their feeding and understood, for the first time in his long life, why the world had needed to end. The wood of the ark groaned in the 3rd day. The animals had stopped making the sounds animals make and had begun making a different sound, a single low keening that the witness recognized from his childhood, the sound a mother makes over a child she cannot save. The lions did not roar. The bulls did not bellow. The birds did not sing. They keened. All of them, in every tongue of every species, keened together as the rain hammered the roof, and the ark rose another cubit and another off the soaked land. And the witness walked from one end of the great vessel to the other, lighting the small lamps that hung from the rafters, because the windows had darkened, because the rain had become so thick that the light of the sun could no longer pass through it, and the world inside the ark was the only world that had light any more. He saw bodies in the water on the fourth day. He had not meant to look. He had told his sons not to look. But the door was sealed, and the upper window was open for the air, and when he climbed the ladder to check the seal of the roof, he looked down. He saw a woman. She was not dead. She was clinging to a beam that had once been the rafter of a great house, and the beam was turning slowly in the current, and her face was turned toward the ark, and her mouth was moving, and the witness could not hear what she was saying, but he understood. She was calling his name. She had known him. She had passed him in the marketplace of the lowland city. She had bought grain from his fields. She had laughed at him, perhaps, when he had spoken of the coming flood. And now she was alive in the water, and the water was rising faster than the beam could float. And the witness watched as the beam turned one final time, and the woman went under, and her hand stayed up for a long moment after the rest of her had vanished. And then her hand also went under, and the rain filled the place where her hand had been, and there was nothing left. He came down from the ladder. He did not tell his sons what he had seen. He sat in the dark with his back against the cedar wall, and he wept for a long time, and the rain hammered the roof, and the animals keened, and the great vessel that was carrying the seed of the new earth rocked gently in the current of a world that was being unmade. There is a thing that the witness understood on the seventh day, and the thing he understood was this. The flood was not a punishment in the way punishments are usually understood. The flood was a cleansing. The blood of the Nephilim had spread so far through the bloodlines of men that there was almost no one left who carried the original breath of Adam in clean form. Almost no one. 8 souls. Himself, his wife, his 3 sons, and the wives of his 3 sons. 8. That was what was left of the unblended line. That was what the ark had been built to carry. Not the species of the world, although the species were aboard. Not the wisdom of the cities, although some of that wisdom had been written down and brought aboard in scrolls of beaten reed. The ark had been built to carry 8 clean drops of blood through a sea that was scrubbing the rest of the corruption away. He understood this on the 7th day. He understood it because on the 7th day he heard, through the wood of the hull, a sound that was not the sound of water. It was a thudding, a rhythmic, patient thudding, low against the lower hull of the vessel. And then another, and then another. And then, in places, a scraping. Long, deliberate scratches against the tar-blackened pitch. The witness pressed his ear to the floor and listened, and he knew. The Nephilim were not all dead. Some of them, the ones who had been bred for the deep, the ones whose corrupted line had given them the lungs of fish and the strength of leviathans, were still alive in the water, and they had found the ark, and they were trying to come in. He did not tell his sons. He did not need to. His sons heard it too. The whole ark heard it. The animals went silent for the first time in 7 days, a silence so total that the witness could hear his own heartbeat above the thudding of the things outside. And the witness went to the place where he had laid the writings of his fathers, and he opened the scroll of the words that had been spoken to him by the voice in the orchard, the voice that had told him to build, and he read the words again. And the words said the door was sealed. And the words said the door would not open until the voice itself opened it. And the witness believed the words, because he had believed the words when there had been no rain and no flood and no reason to believe, and he had no reason now to stop believing. The scraping went on for 2 days. On the 2nd day, one of the things outside found one of the small windows. The window was set high, just beneath the roof, and it was small, no wider than a man's shoulders, and it was meant for air, not for entrance. But the thing outside reached it. The witness, climbing the ladder one final time to refill an oil lamp, saw the hand. It was not a human hand. It was longer than a human hand by half. The fingers were webbed at the lower joints. The skin was the color of a drowned sky. And the nails, the witness would say later in the years he had left, the nails were black and they were curved and they were as long as a finger themselves, and they were dragging across the inside of the window frame, and the thing on the other side of the window was breathing, and the breathing was wet, and the breathing was patient, and the witness understood that he was being studied. The thing on the other side of the window was not trying to break in. The thing on the other side of the window was looking. And in the brief moment before he extinguished the lamp and descended the ladder, the witness saw the eye. It was the size of a fist. It was yellow. It had no white. And it was looking back at him, and it was not afraid. He sealed the window from inside with a wedge of cedar and a smear of pitch. He did not tell his sons what he had seen, but he wrote it down, much later, on the dry slopes of the mountain where the ark would come to rest, and the writing of it was preserved in the long memory of his line, and that line is the line that would one day produce the man who walked out of the desert and stood in the temple and turned over the tables of the corrupted, because the cleansing of the flood was never complete, because some of the blood survived, because not all of the things outside the window drowned. By the 15th day the witness had learned to mark the time by the lamps. The oil burned at a steady rate. He had calculated, in the dry years before the rain, how much oil he would need for 40 days, and he had brought enough for 60, because his wife had insisted, because his wife had always been wiser about supplies than he had been. He thanked her for that wisdom every morning when he lit the first lamp of the day. The lamps were the only sun left. The windows had been sealed. The roof had been pitched and repitched in the days of building until it was a single dark slab of tarred wood that no light could penetrate. The world inside the ark was the world of the lamps, and the witness moved through that world like a man walking through a tomb that was also a womb, because the same vessel that buried the world he had known was carrying the seed of the world that had not yet been born. The sounds outside changed on the 20th day. The scraping stopped. The thudding stopped. The witness no longer heard the things in the deep. What he heard instead, for several days, was a sound he could not identify, a sound that came from very far below the hull, a sound that was almost like singing, except that no creature he had ever known could sing in the way that this sound sang. It was deep. It was slow. It carried through the water and through the wood of the hull and into the bones of every animal aboard. The animals listened. They turned their heads toward the floor and they listened, and they did not keen, and they did not whimper, and they did not sleep. They listened. And the witness listened with them, and he understood that something very large was passing beneath the ark, and that the something was not interested in the ark, and that the something was older than the things that had scraped at the windows, and that the something was the reason those things had stopped scraping. The deep had its own laws. The deep had its own kings. And the kings of the deep did not need to come up. On the 25th day the rain weakened for the first time. The witness had grown so accustomed to the constant hammer of water on the roof that when the sound thinned, even slightly, he stood in the middle of the upper deck and held his breath, because he was not certain that what he was hearing was real. But the rain had thinned. It was still falling, but it was falling in the way rain falls on a normal day, in the way rain had fallen before the world had ended, in the way rain might fall on a world that was beginning to remember how to breathe. The witness fell to his knees on the cedar planks and pressed his forehead to the wood, and he did not pray with words. He did not have words. He had only the breath of his body, and he gave that breath to the floor, and the floor was the only altar he had left. The rain did not stop on the 25th day. It thinned, but it did not stop. It would not fully stop until the 40th day, and even then, the water on the earth would remain for many months, and the ark would drift across a world that had no land, and the witness would learn what it meant to be a sailor on a sea that had no shore. But on the 25th day he understood, for the first time since the door had been sealed, that there would be an after. That the end was not the end. That the cleansing had a limit, and the limit was set by the same hand that had sealed the door, and the same hand would unseal it, and the 8 souls inside the vessel would step out onto a wet and silent earth and would be the beginning again. But the things he had seen would not leave him. The hand at the window. The yellow eye. The woman in the water with her mouth shaping his name. The thudding against the lower hull. The slow song of the great king passing beneath them in the deep. He would carry these things into the new world. He would tell some of them to his sons, and his sons would tell some of them to their sons, and the telling would thin across the generations the way rain thins across a long storm, and by the time the children of his children had built their first new cities, the telling would be only a story. A flood. An old man. A boat. Some animals. A rainbow at the end. The cleansing would become a children's tale, and the children would sleep soundly, and the things that survived in the deep would wait, and the corrupted blood that did not all wash away would walk among the new generations, and would marry into them, and would whisper in their ears, and would build new towers and new altars and new cities, because the corruption is patient, and the corruption knows that it has done this before, and that it will do this again. In the 30th day the witness saw something in the water that he would never speak of. not even to his wife. He climbed to the upper deck for air, and he unsealed one of the small windows for only a moment, and he looked out, and the water was calm in that hour, and the rain had thinned to a mist, and through the mist he saw the surface of the flooded world stretching to a horizon that had no land on it. Nothing. Water in every direction. And on the surface of the water, very far from the ark, he saw a shape. It was not a creature. It was not a body. It was a structure, a piece of something that had been built. It was dark, and it was angular, and it was floating on the surface, and the witness recognized it. It was the top of one of the great pyramids of the lowland kingdom, the kingdom that had risen in the southern valley in the years before the rain. The kingdom whose architects had been giants. The kingdom whose stones had been laid by hands that were not the hands of men. The pyramid was almost entirely underwater. Only the topmost stones were still visible, and as the witness watched, the topmost stones, too, slipped beneath the surface, and the pyramid was gone, and the water was smooth, and there was nothing to mark where the kingdom had been, and there would be nothing for the children of the new earth to find when the water finally drew back, because the water would not draw back fully, and the lowest of the kingdoms would remain beneath the sea, and the children would die for them in the centuries to come, and they would find walls and stairs and altars in the deep, and they would not understand what they had found, because the telling of it had thinned. He sealed the window again. He came down the ladder. He sat with his sons at the long table where they ate their meals, and he ate the dry grain and the dried fruit, and he did not speak of what he had seen. The 40 days came to their end the way long things end, slowly and then all at once. On the 40th morning the witness woke before the others, and he climbed the ladder, and he unsealed the window, and the rain had stopped. There was no rain. The sky was gray, but it was a gray of clouds, not of falling water. The sound of the rain on the roof, that hammer he had lived with for 40 days, was gone, and in its place the witness heard the wind blowing across a sea that had no land, the wind moving over the face of the deep, the way the Spirit had moved over the face of the deep at the very beginning, the way it would move again at every beginning that was yet to come. He came down the ladder slowly. His knees were old. His hands were trembling. He went to the long table where his sons and his wife and the wives of his sons were sleeping, and he laid his hand on the shoulder of his wife, and she opened her eyes, and she did not need to ask what he had come to tell her. She saw it in his face. She had been married to him for many years. She knew what his face looked like when something had ended, and she sat up, and she woke the others, and the 8 souls of the new earth gathered together in the lamplight of the great vessel, and they did not speak. They listened. They listened to the wind, and they listened to the silence beneath the wind, and they listened to the slow movement of the ark on a sea that no living human had ever crossed before. The voice did not speak that day. The voice would not speak for many more days. The water would remain on the earth for many months. The ark would drift, and the dove would be sent, and the dove would return, and the dove would be sent again, and the dove would not return, and the door would finally be opened by the same hand that had sealed it, and the 8 souls would step onto the wet slope of a high mountain, and they would build an altar, and the altar would smoke, and the smoke would rise, and the voice would speak from above the smoke, and the voice would say it would never do this thing again with water. And the witness would believe the voice, because the witness had always believed the voice, and the witness would carry the things he had seen with him into the silence of the new earth, and he would not speak of all of them, but he would speak of enough of them that someone would write them down, and the writing would be passed to his sons, and the sons of his sons, and the sons of those sons, until eventually the writing would arrive in the hands of a man named Moses, and the man named Moses would take what he had been given, and he would compress it, and he would distill it, and he would write it into a book that would survive every empire that came after, and the book would say only this, that there were giants in the earth in those days, and that the wickedness of man was great, and that the rain fell 40 days and 40 nights, and that the 8 were saved, and that the rest were not. But what the book does not say is what the witness saw through the window on the 2nd day. What the book does not say is what scraped at the lower hull on the 7th day. What the book does not say is what sang in the deep on the 20th day, slow and old and uninterested in the small wooden vessel passing above it. What the book does not say is the look on the face of the woman in the water who knew his name. What the book does not say is what the giants did when the water reached the last of the towers, and how their voices carried across the lowlands as they went under, one by one, and how the voices stopped, but not all at once, because some of them could swim, and some of them could not drown easily, and some of them, even now, are not gone. That is the warning the witness carried into the new world. That is the warning thinned by generations into a children's tale. That is the warning the children of the new earth do not want to remember, because to remember it is to know that the deep keeps what the deep takes, and that the deep is patient, and that the corruption that walked the earth before the rain found ways to walk again, and that what the rain did not finish, the earth has been carrying ever since, hidden in bones and in bloodlines and in the dark places of the sea, waiting. Always waiting. Patient the way the deep is patient. Patient the way the things outside the window were patient. Patient the way the king of the deep was patient, passing beneath the ark with its slow song, uninterested in the 8 souls above it, because it knew. It knew what the witness was only beginning to understand. The cleansing was real. The cleansing was complete in the eyes of the voice. But in the eyes of the deep, the cleansing was only the surface. And the surface is not where the deep things live. The ark rests now where the water left it, high on a slope that no human foot was meant to walk. The wood has not all rotted. The pitch has not all softened. There are places, even now, where the cedar still holds the dark of the rain, and where the windows still bear the marks where the wedge of cedar was hammered in to seal them shut, and where the lower hull, if a man could ever reach it, still bears the long parallel scratches of something that tried, for many days, to come in, and was not allowed.